All right, welcome in everybody again to another episode of Gearhaulics. I think we're on number 4 right now. I am joined today by a couple of OGs in the backpacking space. We've got Kalman, aka Ghost Mule, from his channel Everyday Backpacker, and then my returning co-star, co-host, Mr. Jared Snackbox Backcountry Champion from Outside Comfort Zone. Man, that's a hard one to remember. You get kudo points for that. What's going on, guys? How you doing tonight?
Doing great,
Doing
man.
all right here.
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. So, as you know, this is the show that discusses how to pack your entire life on your back and brave the wild outdoors. But today, specifically, we're going to be talking about gas stoves. So there's a couple of different styles that are kind of popular in the backpacking space. We've got your alcohol stoves and your gas stoves. Gas is just a little bit easier, so I figured we'd start with that one tonight. A little bit more idiot proof, and I'm not going to go into specifics here. Snack box, we'll save that for the alcohol stove show that you definitely have to be on. But let's just dive right into the topics for tonight. First of which, obviously, we always kick it off with an easy one, which is what exactly are gas stoves? And there are a few different types that we're going to get into the next bullet point here. But what exactly are gas stoves? It's literally just something that you screw on to the top of a gas can. It has a little platform. You ignite it either with a Bic lighter or it's self-ignited with a piezo igniter. You put your pot on top with some water in it or a pan with some food in it, and you get going. It's pretty simple. I'll kick this over to you guys real quick because I'm sure I missed some things about it. There's probably a lot to talk about it, but very top level. What do you guys think on exactly what are gas stoves?
Well, I think there's three main categories. One of them being propane, which is very rarely used in the backpacking community because it's pretty heavy and large size. But the OG gas stove is going to be the liquid fuel stove, which is going to be your white gases, kerosene, things like that. And so, of course, things like the Whisper Light from MSR, which were, great game changers in the day. They're definitely different from the isobutane in that they are liquid that you have to prime and heat up the stove in order to vaporize it. And then, of course, there's isobutane, which is a pressurized mixture of isobutyryl alcohol and butane, which then, once you turn it on, it automatically vaporizes. There's no moving parts. There's no priming. It's just light and go. So I think, both of them have positives and limitations we can discuss later. But, from my understanding, when I think of gas stove, I think one of the three of those.
Yeah, it sounds pretty spot on there, Ghost Meal. I think also in terms of the priming, just to give everybody a sense of what exactly that means, it basically means you have to kind of drip a little bit of fuel onto the wick and then light it up and then wait for it to turn from sort of the flames like you would see in something like a Zippo lighter to something more like those sort of more aggressive lighters that you might use for illicit substances or something of the sort, that blue glowing flame. And it's worth knowing here that a lot of people, when you first get into backpacking, you might be familiar with those sort of big canisters that Kalman makes that you might use for lanterns or you might use for the big green stove. There are stoves that sort of date back, some sort of more retro style stoves that work with those. But typically what we're talking about are those sort of smaller canisters. They'll have 3 different sizes in your local outdoor shop. And so they can be the small canisters. It looks like Ghost Meal's grabbing a couple of them. They can be the really big ones. And these are typically known for being super convenient. And especially for the sort of 3 seasons, they're particularly reliable. So they're a really good source of heat and a lot of variety. Kind of the last thing that I'll say, and I'm sure we're going to dive into this, Dave, is the sort of price range now goes anywhere from about $10 to $12 all the way up to some really nice ones up in the ballpark of almost $200. So you can really hit a range of prices and features, and we're definitely gonna get into that pretty thick in the next half hour.
Yeah, that's definitely a great segue. So we kind of talked about the different style of fuel that is used for them, and let's just get into the different types that kind of connect to them as well, right? So I brought a couple with me as well here too. This is specific to the backpacking space here. I wish I had enough time. We kind of just threw this one together last minute, folks, in full transparency. So I wish I had like the Coleman, then I could have busted out. But I got a couple here to show you. We got the super ultra light BRS. This is actually like a knockoff style, which weighs only like about an ounce and a half, and we'll get into all that good stuff with the weights and everything. This is the Soto Windmaster here, and quite literally it just has this tiny thread at the bottom that you just screw into an Isopro can that you can get at an REI or other kind of camping stores. So as far as like the different types, that's one of them. And the other one is what Snackbox had mentioned, which is like sort of like the Coleman style stoves. That is sort of reminiscent more of the larger, greener propane tank. So there's definitely different types of fuel that work with different kind of stoves. But I'll leave it there and kind of kick it off to you guys as well to just add to the different types that you can expect. I know there's another one too that uses a very slender can. I don't know if that's white gas that you were talking about, Ghost Mule, but there are a few different types that you can go with.
Yeah, there is also a new type that's starting to get a little more popular, and they are sort of, the canister is a little more remote from the stove. So there'll be a sort of a tube that goes kind of like a braided line that will go so you can keep your canisters separate. And that one has a couple of perks. Typically, it's because the base of it can be a little more solid. So a lot of canoe people like those because you tend to have smaller surfaces and the weight and volume is much bigger on those, but the stability for bigger pots is much greater. I also want to mention two things before we get too far. Number one is when you have any of these stoves that are gas stoves with the canister, the two types you showed, Dave, never, ever, ever use a windscreen for those because it can hold the heat in and actually cause your canister to explode. So never, ever, ever use a windscreen for those. And then the second thing is when we start talking about price, you're going to see that the features are actually, they're pretty remarkable, but you're going to pay a lot for the add-ons, or at least Dave, if you'd be willing to hold up the sort of burners, you'll see on the Soto Windmaster how big the burner is and how many holes are present in it. And that's what you're paying for, is the sort of dispersion of fuel. And that will create a lot more burning surface, whereas that BRS, the stove that's really popular because it's so inexpensive, has a really small burning area. So it's really small, really inexpensive, but it also will likely take a little longer. And especially if there's wind present, you're going to spend a lot more time waiting on that water to boil, which is ultimately where I think most people should cap their backcountry cooking. Is you're going to boil water and nothing more than that. Anything more complex than that, save it for car camping or an overnight typically. What do you think, Oatmeal?
Yeah, so what you talked about with the line feed, it's in this industry is known as a remote feed. And there are definitely some stoves that have it built in, and other companies like MSR has come out with a separate system that actually you can put in, so it attaches to the stove, and so it has its own stand, and it's called a remote feed. It gives a couple advantages. One, it does remove the fuel from the burner source. It also creates, like you said, more stability because the stack is lower to the ground. So if you're doing a larger pot, it definitely becomes more stable. And then also typically they allow you to invert the canister, which helps with the cold function. So canister stoves have a bit of a drawback in that as they off gas, they cool down. And if you already are at freezing or below freezing, that cooling down causes a issue with the efficiency of the stove, which you can manually warm it with your hands and kind of rebuild that. But also inverting it allows for a more pressurized flow and can kind of help with some of that cold weather stuff. So there's definitely some advantages there. The liquid fuel stove, what you were talking about, does use the canister stoves like the fuel canisters like this. And they, by their own nature, do have a remote feed line because they're designed to have the fuel away from the actual burner head because, again, it has to be primed, and so there's heat there. And so they use the windscreen. So what you're seeing with the remote feeds is a kind of a throwback to those white gas designs. But then again, yeah, like you said, with the stoves, you definitely pay for different features. For instance, two stoves that I have, the MSR the Pocket Rocket, which is the original, the OG, and it basically is a small burner head on off, as basic as they come, about $34. And then I recently switched over to the Pocket Rocket Deluxe, which retails for about $70. And what's going on?
Just trying out different screen sizes.
No worries. So this obviously has a couple different features to it, and for being priced twice the price. You have a larger burner head there, as well as a built-in fuel regulator, which my colleague there, Snackbox, the lower elevations, says, there wasn't a lot of difference there, but I have noticed at the higher elevations that the pressure regulator does create a much more efficient burn, and then also does help with a little bit with that cold temperature issues. But that being said, all of these different features that you get with this stove, you're going to pay a bit of a premium. This sucker retails at about $70. But all the canister stoves that I've used, it may not be the lightest in the group, but it's definitely one of the most efficient. In fact, I have actually boiled water faster than my hiking partner, who's been using a wind burner system.
Right on. Those are excellent points, guys. A little bit of a sneak peek into the next topics, but let's just get into this one right now, which is in regards to the weight, or the weights of the different kinds. And again, it really depends on what style of camping you're going to do. If we're talking about those Kalman style, they're kind of bulky. They almost look like a briefcase in size and almost in weight as well. Very clunky, but get the job done, and they're somewhat cheaper as well. If we're sticking more towards a backpacking style stove, like the ones that we were throwing up on screen right here, typically, again, if you're going with the more of the UL option with the BRS with less features, you're looking at somewhere around that ounce to ounce and a half, and then something that's a little bit beefier. Or I guess I should say more midweight would be like the Soto Windmaster or Ghost Mule's MSR Pocket Rocket there. Those are somewhere around the 3-ounce range. And then a little bit heavier I would consider for backpacking would be like your Jetboil systems or the MSR Wind Burner series, something that like comes with a dedicated like screw on top. As well as a pot with it. It's sort of like you're investing in a system more so than just the stove itself. But what do you guys think on weights?
Yeah, there's also, Coleman makes an old school, like it's probably the whole setup is about the size of a grapefruit. And that's one that a lot of our parents probably carried back in the day, if you have parents who backpack. But ultimately, I think here there's a wide range, specifically because there are a lot of needs, sort of like Ghost Mule is alluding to. You might need it for higher elevation. Wintertime changes some of those needs, and even access to certain fuels will change those needs. So if you're on some of the more remote hikes, you might need one like that, the Whisper Light International, where you can use any fuel that you can find and it will work fine. You just have this sort of separate, you have a separate kind of fuel canister and system at work there. So I think by way of weights, I don't worry a lot about them being really big or small. I just kind of use the one, I have a variety of them, and I use the one that fits my needs best, because the weights, even when they're really heavy, are still pretty light.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're looking for weight, obviously the lightest are going to be things like alcohol stoves are going to be pretty light, but they also have their limitations. For instance, out here, when we're dealing with fire bans, they're not, allowed. So you have to go with a canister stove, and the canister stove is going to be the lightest of the gas stoves by far. Even the heaviest ones with the most features are still a fraction of the weight of, say, a Whisper Light or liquid fuel stove. However, the liquid fuel stoves, they have some advantages as well, because you can refill the fuel bottles. You can visually check to see how much fuel you have left. They are not susceptible to weather or temperatures at all. But those things weigh a small metric ton in comparison. They're chunkers. The guys like me who started backpacking in the 90s can sit there and say, yeah, back in my day, we carried around a real man stove. But the reality is I haven't used mine in years, because it's like a brick. So the canister stoves, I think, even with their drawbacks, as far as weight goes and convenience and size, can't beat them.
Yeah, for sure. Those are all excellent points here, guys. Moving right along, we're going to talk about price points next. And again, just to kind of bring up a couple options here. This is the AliExpress option. This isn't even the American version that you can buy. That's probably still from China, which is the all too popular BRS 3000. So needless to say, when I try to light this thing for the first time, I was just kind of like, fire extinguisher on standby type of thing. So it's sort of like buyer beware kind of thing, because kind of going along with the pros and cons, which we're going to get into next, but there isn't a regulator in this stove either. I literally got this, guys, I think including shipping on AliExpress for probably under $10. Yeah, fire safety first, Ghost Mule. So, and you can kind of see it in the flame too. If you have a couple of different systems or you're just starting out, you kind of know the difference like right away with how they kind of perform. But super cheap on this one, like I said, somewhere around the $10 price point range, because I was too cheap to spend the $17 on Amazon here in America for it. And then this one here, again, with the Soto Windmaster and the MSR Pocket Rocket, sort of similar. They have a couple of different models, but this is a little bit more of the upper end. If you have the Pocket Rocket 2 Deluxe, this is the Soto Windmaster version of that, somewhere around the $60 to $65 range in the MSRP price point. But you can find deals, and I definitely recommend that. I didn't pay full price on mine either. And then again, as you're making your way up to jet boil, it's going to get like, especially if you're investing in a system again, it's going to be somewhere like 100 plus. But what do you guys think? Any other examples on different price points for some excellent stoves out there?
Well, again, like I say, the Pocket Rocket Deluxe, you're looking at around $70. And with that, again, you get a couple extra features, but I think, well, like with anything, you have to kind of realize or think about what your goals are out of it. There's certainly nothing wrong with using a $17 stove. Other people, are going to enjoy using the $80 stove. It's going to have a little more features. For full disclosure, I did not pay full price for mine because I do work for a store and I get a pretty decent discount. But I think you just have to decide what features are you looking for and what you're willing to put into it. And I don't think you have to go broke in order to have the best necessary gear, because at the end of the day, that BRS stove that costs $17 is still going to get the job done. And a lot of people use it and a lot of people love it. And so do I think I'm any better because I use this stove? Well, yeah, but that's a whole different story. But in reality, no, I'm because I have an opportunity to be able to get it, and I do love this stove. And if you are looking for something that is going to be a little bit more reliable, a little bit more efficient, then yeah, go ahead and throw that money out there. But if you're starving college student and you want to buy a regular Pocket Rocket or a BRS stove for $17, $20, $30, guess what?
Yeah.
You're still going to get boiling water every time.
Yeah, I mean, I think to second sort of what you're saying there, Ghost Mule, is that if I were to buy just one stove ever again and not buy any others, it'd probably be that MSR Pocket Rocket, because it's not the lightest stove, but it is bulletproof. And basically what we're talking about with these stoves are really just kind of valves. They're just Bunsen burners. So the nice thing about it is you can actually get a really good one for pretty inexpensive. And so it's one of those really great spaces in the backpacking world where when you think about this, it's not the need is really what determines it, not the cost. So you absolutely cannot go into buying a stove thinking that the most expensive one is the best one for you, because I can promise you the most expensive stove that they sell at the outdoor shop is one that only maybe 5% of backpackers need. And in fact, many of us, when you get out there on trail, you're going to find the most seasoned backpackers are going to be the ones using the cheapest stove, that BRS Hornet, or they're going to use the Pocket Rocket that they've been using forever. So it's one of those really interesting spots where if you go out there with a brand new, super expensive stove, people are going to know you're a noob right away, which is not the end of the world. We're a welcoming community, but just don't, it's a great place to just remember here that this is really a great example of a spot where the dollars you spend have no correlation to how good it's going to serve you. Instead, it really is, what is it you need? What are you looking for out of this stove? And what are the features that are going to serve you well? Do you need a big one that's stable because you're cooking for a lot of people? Do you need a small one because you have an ultralight setup and you're just trying to make enough water for tea? Do you need one where you can take it sort of in the wintertime so you can do snow camping? Or, I mean, there's so many different ways to go about it. But what I would also say here, don't let sticker shock scare you if you see one that you really like that's expensive, because even the most expensive stove doesn't even come close to the most expensive sleeping bags out there, or tents, or etc. So even if you're buying the high-end ones, you're still not likely to break the bank on this. So it's a really fun space to kind of think about by way of how you're going to go about buying stoves. And then once you buy that stove, you can start thinking about going stoveless and leaving it at home and taking a Talenti jar instead.
I was just going to chime
Yeah.
in with that. I was going to say, and do you even need a stove at all? Because I know Snackbox didn't even bring one on one of his CT trips. So that's crazy.
2 of them,
Yeah.
actually.
Oh man, that's edging it right there. One thing I want to add to that, being somebody who works in the industry and does on the retail end, if you walk into a store and the first thing you do is go right to the most expensive stove, you should turn around, walk out of that store, and then go find another store. Because the first thing that person that's selling you that gear should ask you is, what are you intending to use it for? What are your parameters? What are you looking to get out of it? When somebody comes into my store, my two least favorite questions are, what's the best one out there? And what do you use? And meaning me, because I use what works for me. And I know a lot of people don't necessarily need what I want. And so, for me, the first questions I ask is I try to get an idea of what that person is looking for goal wise. And then I try to match them up with the best possible stove. Usually it's not the Pocket Rocket Deluxe or the higher price one. It's usually something that's a little bit more basic because they're just starting out. And I'm sorry, but if you're just starting out, you don't need to get a $200 cook system. You may want one, but at the end of the day, it may not work for you in the way that you're thinking it would be. And if you have a bad experience and you spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get it, probably not going to want to do it again. So, definitely it's important to kind of look at what is going to work for you and not worry about what other people use. I think one of the biggest pitfalls as YouTubers we find in is people tend to want to emulate the things that they see on there. And, again, like I always tell people when I do gear stuff, this is what works for me. This is what I like about it. But you need to choose for you what you like about it.
Yeah,
the
that's a great
lesson
point.
there is that. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Round it out.
Well, I was going to say the lesson there is that Ghost Meal is an expert in propane and propane accessories.
Propane and propane. Damn it, Bobby.
That's actually a good one. That's a good impression. Yeah, I mean, I would just echo that. I think that's a great thing even for this show as well, is to just keep in mind that a lot of backpacking and tips and everything is all subjective, and you do kind of have to make up your own mind. I guess there are certain people out there who just want other people to make up their minds for them, but maybe that's not what this show is kind of geared towards. We definitely recommend kind of taking all these tips with a grain of salt, but then also kind of forging your own path. All right, let's move on over into the next category here, which I have, and it is the pros and cons. So again, I'm going to keep bringing these guys up here. So for me, I'm going to challenge Snackbox a little bit here, and what he was talking about as far as the different pros and cons, or the different what you can actually get from one stove over another, because I am definitely more of a gear nerd, like a tech nerd. I do time trials. I'm not joking. This is what I spend my free time with, folks. But, for me, especially when you're looking at different types of stoves, there are things to look at. There are boil time efficiencies, how much fuel a stove can use. And there is a reason behind why there are certain price points for some stoves versus others. And then there's other things too. Again, just if you're talking in more specific terms towards features with the stove, Snackbox mentioned this, but the overall size of the burner can matter as well. What are you trying to cook? Something that is like like this tiny is really just going to kind of boil up some water, and that's pretty much it. But if you want to do something with a larger surface area, get yourself a wider stove. There's also other things too, like creature feature style stuff like this one. One of the biggest things that I don't like about the Soto Windmaster is how the top of this kind of like comes on the stove. There's a lot of them that they just have arms that kind of fling out. And this one, I don't even know if I can do it on camera here. It's like you have to struggle with it a little bit. Has this little like stretchy thing that you have to kind of like wrestle to get it on. So, you know, ease of use also kind of comes into play with it. But what do you guys think with other pros and cons?
Well, I want to pause for a minute here and just mention that if you are a backpacker in so much of a hurry that you're trying to boil water 2 minutes faster than the other person, then maybe your priorities are out of whack. But I do think that, to your point, Dave, that there are just so many different features that are really available. One of the things one of the two sort of my hot takes, I guess, one hot take is that I've never seen one of the piezo starters that doesn't break almost immediately. And so I personally don't buy them for that. And I still will buy sort of the Pocket Rocket Deluxe. I have one of those, but I got it for $12 at REI off of the garage sale because it was broken. The lighter was broken. So I don't, if I have one of those, then great, but I don't count on it, and I don't count on it lasting long. And that's not the determining factor. The other thing that I'd mentioned that's sort of the subtler kind of detail as a con is that, especially with those sort of the different setups on the lighter stoves, depending on how the arms swing out, they can be very prone to collapsing or folding down when you lift a pot or put it down. So for example, maybe Ghostman will be so kind as to hold up his Pocket Rocket Deluxe, that the arms swing out sideways. So if you don't bring your stove down direct or your pot down directly on it, you run the risk of it tipping over. So just be very careful with it, especially because if you've got boiling water, that can be an issue. But I will say there's something really fantastic about these stoves where if you get the right one and you plan your fuel correctly, it all contains in the little pot, typically speaking, and having a hot cup of coffee in the morning is unbeatable on a cold day on a backpacking trip. You can have the grossest instant coffee and you're never going to have a cup of coffee that tastes better than that one when you have a hot cup on a cold morning by your tent. It's just not going to happen. So I think there is an advantage. I do hike typically stoveless or cold soak or whatever you want to call it. But that's for a different reason than not. I love the hot food. So what do you think, Ghost Meal? I'm sure you've got a couple of hot takes here that are better than Dave's bad takes.
You know, the great thing about gear, I love.
Wait a minute here. All right, here we go.
He's out. He's been kicked off the show. You know, the great thing
I have the power
is you can debate it, and it's a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, you know, all of the gear, it does the same thing, and as long as it does what you want it to do, it's going to be a great piece of equipment, no matter how you slice it. There's always going to be gives and takes. You know, as we said, more features, more burner sets, those are going to have a con in the sense that they're going to take up more weight and more space. You can get something super compact, but it's also going to probably be less stable and less reliable. And those are some things. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's going to boil that water, which is really what you're looking for it to do. And, you know, I think the other thing, too, is you know, for me, being out here in the West and spending a lot of time up at high elevations, piezo igniters are something that they don't work above 9,000 feet because they can't create enough static electricity in the atmosphere in order to create the spark. And so I have to use a lighter anyways. So, you know, for me, a piezo igniter is not necessarily it's not a plus or minus in my sense, because I know that the vast majority of the time I'm out there, it's not going to be an option. So I have to carry a big lighter anyways. But also in that same sense, a pressure regulator and a higher burner size is going to be more important for me because they are going to be in more exposed conditions, higher winds. And there's so many myriads of pros and cons that you can go down, and you can almost talk yourself in and out of anything. We actually have a term for it, at least at the shop I work at, which is called paralysis by analysis, where you spend so much time worrying about the pros and cons that you just can't even make a decision. And so, you know, they do have a lot of great positives and negatives. And, you know, at the end of the day, they all get the thing done. And so if you're looking for something that is going to be more fuel efficient and maybe boil a little bit faster, you're going to spend a little bit more money and you're going to sacrifice some weight for that. If you're looking for something to be very fast, very light, and you're going to sacrifice with reliability and durability and stability. Nothing's right, nothing's wrong. It just depends on what you're looking to get out of it.
Yeah, those are all great points. And to kind of round that out and slide into our next category here, which is pro tips. I'm going to echo the pressure regulator, or just you might just hear the term regulator with a stove that Ghost Mule was just talking about. If anything, like one of the pro tips that I have would be to try and get one if you can. And in general, it just means for the most part for most people in their use cases is that it's just going to perform a little bit better, not only in those colder environments, but also when the can is starting to get low. And again, specifically for isopro cans, because that's what I have the most experience using here. But that would definitely be one of my pro tips. The other one that I would mention here, and it is a term that it's not one of my favorites, but I've heard it and I sort of agree with it sometimes, which is the 2 is 1 and 1 is none kind of factor there. Yes, if you are in like Ghost Mule's higher elevation, maybe certain things don't work. I also heard that the wand lighters for the Bic lighters don't work at a certain elevation either. But if you are under a certain elevation, I would definitely recommend the piezo for a certain, I don't know. It's not super reliable, I agree, but just having an extra, even if you carry like 2 mini Bic lighters, would be another pro tip that I have. But what kind of pro tips do you guys have in regards to gas stoves?
Don't get me wrong. If I have opportunity to use a piezo, I'm going to use the piezo. They're super simple. For me, again, I think my pro tip is just, my perspective being out west. I agree. Pressure regulator is definitely something that I think is worth the investment in both cost and weight, because one of the biggest drawbacks you're going to run into with canister fuel stoves is as you start getting lower in that canister's pressure, you start losing a lot of that performance. Right. And you actually end up spending more fuel to get it done. Whereas with a pressure regulator, you get a more consistent burn time, and then you have a precipitous drop at the end. And so you're getting a little bit more bang for your buck in that. And I totally get trying to be as light as possible. I'm 43 years old and I just can't carry the weight as much as I used to. And so totally understand that. But you're talking ounces. And if you have the ability to go that route, I think it's definitely going to make, because if you're like me, at the end of the day, you just want that meal now and you don't really want to worry about it. And the most disheartening thing in the world is watching your flame just go shh. And it's just like, fudge, man. So, I think, if it came down to apples and oranges, spending most of my time above tree line can't beat a pressure regulator.
Yeah. So I've got 3 quick ones that I think are useful. There's one that I've said about 1,000 times, so you'll have to forgive me for this if you've heard it already. But one is when you're lighting it, especially if you don't have the piezo lighter. So if this is your stove, right? What a lot of people will do with their lighter is come in hot like this, and then the flame will burst up, and they'll be scared. But when you're lighting it, let me see if I can get it here. You light your lighter and you bring it up under the fuel, and you won't be scared. It'll light really gently, and you don't have any fear of burning yourself. So when you're bringing in the lighter, instead of bringing it down straight on top, bring it up from the bottom, and it will light up, and it's so much better. It just feels better. It's not scary, etc. That's one of the tips. One of the others is, I think you guys might be able to help me demonstrate this a little bit, but when you're buying them, especially if you're going to be in colder climates or with colder weather, or if you're going to be cooking food that requires a little more precision, choose a stove with a bigger knob for the adjustment. So Ghost Mule, if you can hold up that MSR Pocket Rocket Deluxe, it is enormous. And that's really great because that's exactly it compared to the Soto there. It's much smaller. And what that means is with my big gorilla hands, it's harder for me to adjust it really narrowly and make smaller adjustments or tweaks to how much fuel's coming out. So the bigger that knob, the better. And they're made of wire, so they're not super heavy. But I love the one on that MSR Pocket Rocket Deluxe because it's so big and you can do it with a pair of gloves really easily. You don't have any risk of getting too close to the flame. Last one is if you're going on a trip somewhere and you need to fly, you can't take these on the plane if they've ever been used, if they have any of that residue. So the pro tip is if you're going on a shorter trip where you need to fly somewhere, or even if you're doing a bigger one, buy a new one and have it shipped to wherever you're going. So get a BRS, that Pocket Rocket, get the $12, $13 one for a weekend, ship it to the hotel you're staying at before you start the hike, use it, and then just $12 you can throw it away, or you can find somebody who's starting their hike and say, hey, listen, if you live around here, here's a free stove, pass it on. And that kind of works well with all of this. Anytime you're finished with them, they're not going to break on you. Typically, I've never had one that's failed on me on that level where I can't use it anymore. I just find others that work better. So pass it on to new hikers and share the love, because there are a lot of really great older stoves that you can share with others. That's it.
Yeah, I had one more pro tip I kind of missed, and you kind of reminded me of it. Is it's not necessarily about the stove, it's about lighting systems. And for me, the absolute greatest lighting system in the world is the miniature Bics, because they're small, they're lightweight, they generally last forever. But even if you do manage to run out of fuel, you can still light a stove with it because it gives off a spark. So I definitely lit stoves without even having fuel in the lighter. And so, it's definitely worth, I mean, you're looking at like what, a 70 cents, 75 cents, I think per unit. And, toss it in a Ziploc baggie. That's the other thing. Don't let these get wet because it will screw up the striker on it. So definitely kind of keep it in a Ziploc baggie with like a, essentials bag or something, but can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, or even I like to buy the pack of 3 or 4 and just pepper them around my backpack so that I always have one. Even if I leave on a trip and forget it, I can always just kind of usually dig in. It's kind of like having a pen in your backpack. If you dig enough, you're probably going to find one. And so those Bic lighters are tremendous for it, because to your point, Ghost Meal, you'll lose it before it ever dies on you.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like a lip balm or something like that. I have to say, though, I still am a bit of a throwback. I can't completely let go of my old school ways. I do still carry matches with me as a backup.
Nice. That works. All right, I'm gonna round it out there and just kind of echo Snack Box. I was actually one of the dummies who would do that, where you just like light it right next to the stove, and I learned that from you, which is awesome. And I also applied it to bringing like a fire starter too, to start a fire. Yeah, like an SBIC cube or something else that you use to start a fire. You can use that same technique even with the mini Bic, where you just, as long as you have the flame up and you're not trying to go down, because then you can just scorch your thumb. As long as you're holding it up, just hold up the fire starter, get it going a little bit that way, and throw it in first. It's a lot easier than trying to singe your hands. All right. Last category here, guys, as always, to round it out, is your final thoughts and final verdict. For me personally, I am all for gas stoves, especially if you're just starting out. I would definitely say that it's a little more user-friendly. It's a little bit easier, obviously, right? You're just kind of screwing it on the top of your canister. And again, if you have the piezo, it really doesn't get much easier than that as far as cooking in the backcountry goes. So as far as just like overall simplicity, I think it's one of the easiest that you can go with. But again, and we can kind of get into this with alcohol stoves, sort of a teaser for that episode if we ever get around to that one. And that's to say, especially and echoing Snack Box again here a little bit, if you're traveling, it's a lot harder in certain areas to pick up a canister stove. It's a lot easier to just get alcohol fuel. So they really do have their own pros and cons, and it really depends on the type of trip that you're going on. But what are your final roundups here, fellas?
Yeah, I love them. I think they're great. I think I think what's nice about it is they're one of the less expensive pieces of gear. So they're a fun place to start and get a good higher end piece for yourself, or get a cheaper one. They're also great for practicing at home. So cook some recipes at home. Make sure you do it in a ventilated area. Don't like cook in your bathroom or something with the windows closed. That's probably not a good idea. But definitely give it a shot. Buy a cheap one, buy an expensive one. Doesn't matter. Buy them all and try them out. they're just great to have in general. And what's also nice is as you go and get more comfortable, there's a good chance you'll either find that you want a nicer one, or you'll find that there are times when you don't need one at all. And that's the real joy of the sort of stoves, is that you can have some that you use for different occasions. You can have a bunch. You could probably buy all the stoves we've been talking about for like $300-400, which is less expensive than most of us have for our sleeping bags. So I love the idea of having a handful of them and testing them out on your own. So I'm all for them. I think they're great. And I also want to put a plug in here that they're particularly good for making sure you can use them, because sort of like you were saying, Dave, when we're in the Smokies, we can use the alcohol stoves. But when you're in Colorado, for example, every year for the last 5, there's been a ban on any stoves that don't have a valve on it. So you couldn't use sort of an alcohol stove. You would have to use these or go stoveless. And so I think they're good to have just in your setup anyway, for those times where you have to have one or you have to go stoveless. So all for it 100%. This is a no-brainer, I think. I love them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just can't beat the simplicity and reliability of them, especially with isobutane. There's almost no moving parts. It's just basically a valve and a burner head. And it's going to be easily used. Even the most novice of backpackers is going to be able to figure out how to pull, a flame out and get their boil going, versus something like a liquid fuel stove, which is going to definitely take a little bit more, practice and finesse. And I think even with a alcohol stove, you have that same kind of, educational build up to it. And then also to kind of second what Snackbox said, again, being out west, dealing with fire bans and things like that, you don't have to worry about it not being able to be used, because it's always going to be allowed. It's never going to be blocked by a fire ban, whereas alcohol and campfires are going to be banned. They're not. So simplicity, reliability, and accessibility, I think, again, it's a no-brainer. And again, as he said, you're not going to, even the nicest stove, you're not going to come close to breaking the bank like you would with a sleeping bag or a tent or something like that. So you can get a pretty decent option for a relatively low price.
Yeah, they have a new Durston stove that has it's really asymmetrical, and one end is higher than the other. And
dude, you just lost all your subscribers right there.
I'm just making jokes. These are just jokes. There is a nice one from Melanzana, but you have to run a marathon and then take 3 drops of a witch's blood to Leadville, and then you get it.
Shots fired.
Be jealous.
I love it.
You have to know the password and the secret handshake, and you have to show up on a day of the month that is odd but prime. I don't know. There are a lot of, I haven't been able to figure it out just yet how to get that stove, but maybe one day.
That is awesome. I'm all there for it.
Sounds like a birthday marathon.
Oh, man.
Sorry, Dave. I don't mean to derail everything.
No, I thought it was perfect, but I don't know. It's a hot topic because I don't know if we want to spoil it or not. And you can let me know, Ghost Mule, if you want me to edit this part out. But just picked up his Dan Durston X-Mid, so that's why if there was any tension, there you go.
Nope, yep, I definitely crossed over and got the Durston and X-Mid. And then not only did I get that, but I also just recently purchased a Waymark backpacking pack. So, yeah, I've crossed over to
that one's actually solid. That one's good.
You're gonna show up in a Melanzana next week, and I'm gonna have to drive to Montana and fist fight you.
I draw the line there. I trust Snackbox's assessment of that completely.
Well, technically, you didn't draw the line. They drew the 12, 13 lines, and you haven't made the pilgrimage.
Hard to get. Nothing. It's like a cult.
There goes any chance of this show ever getting sponsored. Thanks, guys.
they don't sponsor anybody anyway.
That's true. We're safe on that one.
They won't take my money. They're not going to try to give me anymore. Sorry.
All right, I'm going to try to rein that one in here if I can.
Should we redo that ending there?
I'm gonna keep it. You know, hey, why not? Let's let it fly.
Just real
Um,
stuff. Real stuff.
there you go, man. Real talk with the fellas
All
here.
right. Well, don't hate me,
All right.
everybody.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for joining on this one. I love this topic. I think it's a fantastic topic. I'm big on stoves, and I like to experiment with different ones and kind of just dial in like we were talking about and figure out what is right for you. Let's wrap it up here. Jared, I'm not gonna have you say it every single time. I'm gonna put the description down below. I did that to you the first couple of times, but check out his channel. It's Outside Comfort Zone. If you're not already subscribed, what are you doing? Get on over and subscribe. Ghost Mill, since this is your first time on the show, I'll let you do a little shameless plug here for all your social medias. I know you're over there on YouTube at Everyday Backpacker, so make sure you check them out there. But where else can people find you over the intranets?
The next best option would probably be Instagram, and it's pretty easy because it's everyday_backpacker. And that one I tend to do a little bit more kind of behind the scenes, a little bit of promo into what's coming up next. I also offer people opportunities to tell me what they want to see made next, because I am terrible at coming up with ideas. And also, just kind of sharing some funny gear stuff that I got going on. But yeah, those are the two easiest ways to get a hold of me or to check out my stuff. So.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks again, gentlemen, for joining. Your checks are in the mail. I think I might end up doing premieres for a lot of these. So if we did a premiere for this one and you guys hit us up in the chat, thank you very much. If we didn't, or if you're catching this after the fact and you have any other questions, hit us up in the comments down below and we'll respond for any other burning stove questions that you have. You like what I did there? Actually, wasn't even planning on that one. That was
Totally
a great semi-dad joke. What are you talking about, Jared? You love that one. Come on. That was right up your alley.
Group is cringing. Really?
I've matured.
All right, fellas.
Whatever.
All right.
Whatever.
I'm going to call it here. Let's hang out in the green room for a couple extra minutes. But thanks again for joining everybody, and we'll see you on the next episode.
That's good.